Chapter 1: Neon Shadows and Broken Thrones. The Verris Prime space station was a labyrinth of steel arteries and flickering neon veins, suspended in the black cradle of space. Somewhere far beyond the station's outer hull, stars burned in perfect silence. But here in the underbelly, the air thrummed with the noise of 1,000 different lives colliding. Rafe Calder stepped off the maglev tram into the lower ring market, where the air smelled of burnt spice crystals and engine coolant. Holosigns and alien scripts pulsed overhead, selling everything from plasma pistols to counterfeit royal seals. Traders barked prices in a dozen languages, their voices bouncing off the arched metal ceilings. Somewhere, deep under the hum of the crowd, came the steady throb of the station's reactor, an endless heartbeat. He was halfway through bargaining for a new fuel manifold when he noticed her. She stood beneath a fractured sign advertising Tsar's luxury imports, the hollow faces flickering over her hooded form. At first glance, she was just another traveler trying not to be noticed, but something about the way she scanned the crowd, eyes sharp beneath the shadow of her hood, told Rafe she wasn't here to shop. Her cloak was too fine for the lower ring, even dust-stained. The fabric shimmered faintly in the light like threads of molten silver. When their eyes met, she crossed the walkway without hesitation, her stride smooth and deliberate. "You're human," she said in accented standard, her voice a low purr that cut through the noise. Rafe arched an eyebrow. Sharp eyes. "Want an autograph?" She didn't smile. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder, scanning the crowd again before leaning closer. "I need a pilot, one who doesn't ask questions." "Lady," that's how pilots end up dead. Her hood tilted, revealing the faintest curve of a smile, wry, almost mocking. "Then perhaps the reward will keep you alive long enough to finish the job." She paused, letting the air between them stretch, then added, almost playfully, "Huh? Restore my throne, and the Snuvva between my legs is all yours." The word Snuvva meant nothing to him, but the delivery was pure bait. A nearby vendor froze mid-shout, eyes darting between them as if he'd overheard a royal scandal. Rafe just leaned back against a rusted support beam, studying her. "That some kind of alien fruit?" he asked dryly. Her eyes flashed, not with offense, but with something else. "Interest, maybe, in my culture," she said, voice dropping lower. "The Snuvva is the sacred vow. To offer it is to bind one's future to another." "Uh-huh." Rafe pushed off the beam. "And here, I thought you were propositioning me." She let the hood shadow her face again, but not before he caught the faintest curve of amusement at her lips. "Perhaps both." Before he could reply, a ripple passed through the crowd. Stall vendors ducking, traders gathering their goods in a hurry. Through the shifting bodies, Rafe saw them. 3 armored enforcers in iridescent green plating, weapons slung, but hands too close to the triggers. Their helmets reflected the market's neon glare in sickly shades. "They're looking for me," she said simply. "Of course they are," Rafe muttered. "It's never the easy jobs." She turned to him fully now, her voice suddenly urgent beneath the cool exterior. "You have a ship?" He hesitated just long enough to see her shoulders tense, then nodded. "Yeah, she's old, stubborn, and smells like burnt coffee, but she'll fly." The enforcers spotted them, their helmets locking forward in unison. The crowd's noise dimmed into a tense hush. "Then we leave," she said. No plea, no request, just command. Rafe didn't argue. He'd been in enough tight spots to recognize the start of a bad one. As they cut through the narrow service passages, the hum of the station deepened, becoming a constant metallic vibration under his boots. Pipes overhead hissed with venting steam, and the glow panels here flickered in a slow, sickly rhythm. "What's your name, princess?" he asked, half expecting her to dodge the question. "Zira," she said without looking at him. Former heir of the Canary Empire. My cousin sits on my throne now. I intend to take it back. Rafe's lips curved in a slow grin. And you want a human for that job? Guess we've got a reputation for doing the impossible. At that, she finally met his eyes again, and for a moment her guarded expression cracked, revealing the faintest glimmer of hope or maybe desperation. We'll see, she murmured. The Emberwolf's docking bay loomed ahead, bathed in the pale blue light of its shielded entrance. Rafe keyed the hatch, and the smell of old metal and warm circuitry greeted him like home. Behind them, the distant echo of armored boots was growing louder. After you, Your Highness, he said with a mock bow. Her eyes narrowed, but she stepped aboard without hesitation. The hum of the Emberwolf's engines came alive beneath their feet, the vibration different from the station's, more personal, like the growl of an old beast ready to run. For the first time, Rafe wondered just how far this job would take him, and why. Against all better judgment, he was already certain he wasn't going to walk away. Chapter 2, Engines and Nodes. The Emberwolf shuddered as her docking clamps released, the vibration traveling through the deck plates like the purr of some great metal animal finally set free. The hull's old grav panels hummed faintly, adjusting for the shift from station to deep space drift. From the pilot's chair, Rafe eased the freighter clear of Verris Prime's hangar shield. Outside, the void opened up, an endless canvas of blackened starlight, broken only by the distant glitter of orbital lanes and the faint red wink of a patrol beacon far to starboard. Behind him, Zira stood near the galley bulkhead, her silver-threaded cloak now folded over one arm, without the hood shadowing her face. The full impact of her Canary heritage was visible. Features too perfect for human symmetry, irises flecked with light, as though someone had trapped shards of a nebula inside them. She was watching him fly, not just idly, but with a predator's patience, her gaze flicking to his hands on controls, the subtle way he nudged the thrusters to avoid a drifting cargo crate in the outbound lane. You don't use the autopilot, she said finally, as if accusing him of a crime. Rafe smirked without looking back. Never trust the machines to make the right kind of mistakes. Her brow furrowed slightly. Mistakes? Yeah, sometimes the wrong move's the only one that works. She tilted her head at that, studying him like a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. A warning chime pulsed softly from the console. Hyperspace corridor clear. Rafe's fingers danced over controls, and the view ahead stretched into infinity as the ship's drive spun up. The hum deepened into a low, throbbing roar. Zira braced herself against the bulkhead as the stars blurred into streaming lines of light. The moment the transition settled, she crossed to the co-pilot's seat, moving with the unhurried elegance of someone used to commanding a room or a throne room. I meant what I said in the market, she began, her voice steady. The Snuvva is not a crude joke. It is the most sacred promise my people can make. It binds not just bodies, but lives. Chapter 3, Teeth in the Dark. The Gryphon Rift wasn't on any sane navigator's chart. It was a graveyard of forgotten wars. Hulks of shattered ships drifting between asteroid fragments, their twisted hulls glinting like bones in starlight. Every few minutes, a distant collision echoed to the Emberwolf sensors. Two debris chunks grinding together in the endless cold. Rafe throttled down as they slipped past the first ring of wreckage. Welcome to the neighborhood, he said, voice low. Try not to touch anything. Half of these carcasses are wired with scavenger mines. Zira stood behind him, hands clasped at the small of her back, gaze fixed on the swirling shadows ahead. You speak as if you've been here before. Once. Left in a hurry. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because this place belongs to raiders, he said, scanning the long-range sensors. And they don't like visitors who leave breathing. As if summoned, a warning pulse screamed from the console. Contacts, 3 fast-moving blips. closing in from starboard. No transponder codes, just a thin, jagged signal spike that Rafe recognized instantly. "Pirates," he muttered. The ship shuddered as something slammed into the hull. Lights flickered. Zira's voice sharpened. "Boarders." "Boarders," he confirmed. "Grab something solid." A moment later, the grav field cut out with a soft whump. Rafe's boots drifted from the deck as the Emberwolf entered zero-G. The air was suddenly full of the quiet hiss of life support fans, the faint crackle of static from overloaded circuits. Shapes moved in the half-dark. 3 figures in jagged, mismatched armor clambering through the breached side hatch. Their helmets were insectal, eyes glowing green. The lead raider leveled a pulse carbine and barked something in a guttural alien tongue. Zira's hand went to the side of her cloak, but Rafe was already moving. Zero-G combat was chaos to most species. But humans, Rafe had learned, adapted fast. He kicked off the pilot's chair, twisting midair to slam into the lead raider, one hand wrenching the carbine away, the other driving a stun baton into the alien side. Blue arcs danced across the armor plates as the raider convulsed. The second pirate swung a serrated blade in a slow, looping arc. Momentum in zero-G was unforgiving. Rafe caught the wrist, used the alien's own spin to wrench the weapon free, and shoved the body into the bulkhead hard enough to knock the breath out of it. Zira moved too, fluid and precise, her cloak swirling around her as she drew a curved blade that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her strike severed the oxygen line on the third raider's helmet. A hiss of vapor burst into the air, sending the aliens scrambling backward toward the hatch. They didn't need to finish the fight. The remaining 2 disengaged, dragging their stunned leader, and fired grapples back to their own vessel. The sound of the clamps releasing was followed by the deep, hollow quiet of open space again. Rafe floated for a moment, catching his breath. Blood from a cut above his brow drifted off in tiny red spheres, glinting like rubies before the ship's filters whisked them away. Zira anchored herself against the console, her breathing measured. "You fight as if gravity itself is optional." He grinned, wiping the cut with the back of his hand. "For us, it kind of is. Trick is, you stop thinking in up and down. Just move." Her eyes lingered on him, evaluating, maybe even admiring. Kenari warriors train for years to fight in zero-G. You improvise in seconds. "That's a human thing," he said, starting to reboot the ship's grav system. "We're bad at rules, but we're great at making it up as we go." The artificial gravity hummed back online, pulling them both gently to the deck. Zira stepped closer, studying the gash on his temple. Her fingers brushed near the wound before she caught herself. "You are bleeding." "Yeah," he said, sitting back in the pilot's chair. "That tends to happen when people shoot at me." She hesitated a beat, then reached for the medkit without asking, kneeling beside him as she cleaned the cut. Her touch was precise, but not cold. For a few moments, neither spoke. The only sound the low, constant hum of the Emberwolf's drives and the faint rustle of gauze. Then she said softly, "Perhaps you are the kind of man who can help me take back my throne." Rafe's lips twitched into a lopsided smile. "Maybe, but next time, your sacred Snuvva offer better come with hazard pay." For the first time since he'd met her, she laughed, quiet but real. Chapter 4, Palace of Ghosts. The Emberwolf emerged from hyperspace on the far side of Kenari Prime's primary moon, its battered hull reflecting pale silver light. Beyond the curve of the moon, the planet hung like a jewel, its oceans catching the sunlight in emerald and sapphire flashes, the sprawling continents trace of the faint glow of city grids. From a distance, it was still beautiful. Up close, it was a wound. The once bright capital, Iliathus, glittered under an artificial curfew glow, a grid of cold white floodlights instead of the soft amber lanterns that had marked Kenari streets for centuries. The crystal spires, proud towers of refracted light, were dimmed. At their bases, Rafe spotted the angular silhouettes of armored dropships parked like carrion birds. The palace itself loomed in the distance, but its outer terraces crawled with mercenary troops in mismatched armor, their banners a patchwork of syndicate sigils and private warband marks. Zira stood at the viewport, hands braced against the frame. Her reflection in the glass was pale, but her eyes burned, not with shock, but with something older and sharper. "They've gutted the heart of the city," she said, voice barely audible over the ship systems. Rafe glanced at her. "I've seen occupations before. They always start with symbols. Make the people think nothing's theirs anymore." Her gaze flicked to him, the corner of her mouth tightening. "Do humans always talk about destruction as if it were weather?" "Not weather," he said, flipping switches to kill their emissions profile. "Storms end on their own. Occupations don't. Someone has to push them out." They didn't land anywhere near the palace. Instead, Rafe threaded the Emberwolf into the lower sky docks, a cluster of shadowed maintenance bays abandoned after the first week of the coup. The dock smelled of rust and stagnant water, the air thick with the tang of corroded alloy. Zira moved quickly, her cloak now replaced by a close-fitting infiltration suit of muted blues and grays. She handed Rafe a small breathing mask. The tunnels below the city were built for palace servants and supply carts. They've been sealed for centuries, but I know the routes. The maglev tunnels were a claustrophobic maze, arched ceilings of polished stone now cracked and moss-stained, the embedded crystal light strips flickering with age. Their footsteps echoed in the still air. Rafe trailed a few paces behind, scanning intersections, every sense alert. "You sure nobody else knows about these passages?" "My cousin's mercenaries prefer blasters of history," she said without looking back. They would not think to check the bones of the city. As they neared the surface level, the low murmur of voices reached them. Alien syllables, sharp and guttural, the language of hired off-world killers. Zira held up a hand, and they slipped into the shadow of an old freight alcove. Through a narrow gap in the tunnel wall, Rafe saw the underside of a market plaza above. Once, it might have been filled with stalls draped in silks, the air thick with spice and sweet wine. Now, patrol drones drifted through the empty square, like bored predators. The only movement was a column of armored soldiers marching past, their boots striking in perfect rhythm. Zira's eyes tracked them with a predator's patience, but her voice was low. "The Crystal Palace is ahead, beyond the Western Gardens. My cousin has closed it to all but his guard and his Vralcan advisors." Rafe frowned. "And how do you plan to walk back into your own throne room?" Her lips curved faintly humorless. "The same way you boarded that raider ship in the Rift, without permission." When they finally reached the palace sublevel, the air changed. It was cooler here, and the faint scent of perfumed oils still clung to the stone, as if the walls remembered better days. The grand corridors above echoed faintly with the sound of boots, mercenary patrols, moving in pairs. Rafe pressed himself against the shadow of a pillar and watched Zira step into the faint light of a service hall. Even now, in her muted armor, she moved with the unshakable grace of someone who belonged here. He could see it in the way her fingers brushed the carved inlays in the walls, the slight pause as she passed an arched doorway leading to what had once been the court's music chamber. "You're not just trying to win a war," Rafe said quietly. "You're trying to get your home back." She didn't turn to face him, but her voice softened. "Home is not a place. It is the people who will not abandon you." He almost said that's a human way, but stopped himself. This wasn't the time to remind her how different they were. Up ahead, a set of ornate doors loomed, the last barrier before the palace's heart. Zira turned to him, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp as crystal. "Beyond here," she said, "there's no turning back." Rafe checked the charge on his sidearm, the weapon humming faintly in the quiet. "Then we'd better make it count." The massive doors opened just enough for them to slip inside, and the palace swallowed them whole, its once vibrant halls now lit like a tomb. Chapter 5, Betrayal in Starlight. The western gardens of the Crystal Palace had once been a marvel. Terraces carved from living crystal, lined with trees whose silver leaves chimed softly in the evening wind. Pools of still water mirrored the stars, and luminous flowers drifted on their surfaces like fallen moons. Now, the wind carried the bitter tang of ion discharge, and the pools were ringed with patrol lights. The chimes were gone. In their place came the faint mechanical buzz of security drones hovering just beyond the tree-line. Rafe and Zira slipped through the shadow of a colonnade, keeping low. Overhead, the palace's glass-domed ceiling revealed Kenari's Prime's twin moons, one silver-white, the other a blood-tinged rose. Their light spilled over the terraces, painting the gardens in pale fire. They weren't alone for long. From the far side of the terrace, a figure approached, tall, broad-shouldered, armor etched with the crest of the old royal guard. His helmet retracted, revealing a weathered Kenari face with eyes like storm clouds. Zira straightened instantly. Velith. The man's expression softened as he looked at her, something like relief breaking through his sternness. "I heard whispers you were alive," he said, voice rough. "By the suns, I thought I'd never see you again." Rafe hung back, watching. He'd been around enough deals gone wrong to know when someone was about to sell you out. The way Velith's gaze flicked toward the upper terraces, the ones where Rafe knew snipers would love to perch, made his skin crawl. Zira stepped forward. "I need you, Velith. I'm here to take back the throne. Will you stand with me?" The old guard captain hesitated. His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have come back. You don't understand what your cousin has brought down on us. That's why I'm here." Her voice sharpened. "To end it before the Vril can choke my people death." Velith's gaze dropped for the briefest moment. Enough. Rafe's hand drifted toward his pistol grip. The first shout came from above, in the mercenary's harsh tongue. Shadows moved on the terraces. The hiss of power weapons charging filled the air. Rafe didn't wait. "It's a trap," he barked, grabbing Zira's arm and shoving her toward the nearest crystal balustrade. The first energy bolt sliced through the air where they'd been standing, scattering shards of stone and burning deep gouges into the terrace tiles. Velith didn't move to stop the mercenaries. He just stood there, eyes unreadable. Betrayal landed heavier than the weapon's fire. Zira's breath caught, and for an instant she looked younger, like someone who just had the ground pulled from beneath her. Rafe's instincts took over. He fired 3 quick shots toward the upper terrace, not to hit, but to make the shooters duck, then yanked a small cylindrical charge from his belt. The detonator blinked once before he tossed it toward the reflecting pool. The explosion wasn't large, but it was loud enough to shatter the surface of the water and send a plume of spray into the air. In confusion, he hauled Zira toward a side gate half hidden by overgrown crystal vines. They dove into the shelter of the servants' promenade, the echo of the blast still ringing in Rafe's ears. The air here was damp and cooler, carrying the scent of wet stone and the faint floral perfume from the untrampled parts of the garden. Zira yanked her arm free, spinning on him. "You think I run from my enemies?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Not with anger alone, but with grief. "I think you live to fight the ones who matter," Rafe shot back. "And you can't do that if you're dead on a terrace with a hole through your chest." Her jaw worked as if she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. She turned away instead, her shoulders tight. After a long moment, she said quietly, "Velith was my oldest friend. He taught me to ride the wind beast, to hold a blade steady. He swore to guard my life. And tonight he almost ended it." Rafe said, softer now. She glanced at him, her eyes catching the faint light like polished stone. "Why are you still here, human?" You could have left me in the market. You could have taken your ship and gone. He met her gaze evenly, because humans don't quit on the people they believe in. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint hum of the palace's power grid far above, and the distant echo of mercenary boots hunting through the gardens. When Zira finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. Then let's make sure they regret letting us live. Chapter 6, The Storming of the Throne. The storm rolled over Iliathus like a living thing. Forks of green-white lightning ripped across the sky, flashing off the crystal towers and plunging the city into alternating moments of blinding light and deep, thunder-black shadow. Each peal rattled the palace windows, the sound carrying down to the stones into the hidden service hall, where Rafe and Zira crouched over a spread of stolen schematics. Outside, the winds tore through the upper gardens, bending the silver-leaved trees like blades of grass. The air smelled of ozone and rain, sharp and electric. For the first time in weeks, the mercenary patrols had pulled back toward cover. Canary palaces weren't built for weather like this, and the storm was enough to thin the guard. "Perfect cover," Rafe muttered, strapping the EMP charges across his chest. Zira tightened the wrist guards on her curved plasma blades, the faint hum of their cores vibrating in the narrow space between them. "We will have to cross the eastern terrace to reach the throne chamber," she said. "My cousin will have double the guards inside, storm or no storm." Rafe gave her a lopsided grin. "Then we make the storm work for us." They moved. The first blast of wind hit them as soon as they slipped out into the open terrace, whipping Zira's cloak into a streaming banner behind her. The rain came in slanted sheets, stinging against Rafe's cheeks, blurring the sharp lines of the palace's crystalwork. Lightning flared again, silhouetting the massive double doors of the throne chamber in a stark, alien glow. Two mercenaries spotted them through the haze. One raised a rifle. The other barked into a comm Rafe was already moving. He dropped low, sliding on the slick tiles, and hurled an EMP grenade between them. The device popped with a dull whump, releasing a pulse that made the guards' armor lights flicker and their weapons go dead in their hands. "Your toys are very human," Zira said over the wind as they ran. "They work," he shot back. Inside the palace, the noise of the storm dulled, replaced by the steady thrum of the power grid. The throne chamber's approach hall stretched ahead, polished floors reflecting the glow of tall, vertical crystal panels lining the walls. Between each panel, mercenaries waited, weapons ready. Rafe ducked behind a pillar as plasma bolts sizzled past, burning smoking scars into the wall. He yanked 2 smoke canisters from his belt, tossing them high into the vaulted ceiling. The instant they burst, the crystals refracted the haze into a shifting rainbow fog. Visibility dropped to nothing. That was enough for Zira. She surged forward into the haze, a streak of silver and blue. Rafe caught only glimpses of her through the swirling smoke, a flash of her blade catching light, the arc of her leap over a stunned guard, the faint hiss of plasma meeting armor. By the time Rafe cut through the haze with another charge, the path to the throne chamber was littered with groaning bodies. Zira stood at the center of the great doorway, her breathing steady, her blades humming. The throne room was everything Rafe expected from an alien empire. Vast, arched ceilings alive with faint starfield projections, the floor inlaid with golden spirals, and the throne itself carved from a single block of transparent crystal. Sitting on it was Zira's cousin, broad, heavy-set, armor inlaid with black opals, a predator's smile on his lips. "So," the cousin drawled, his voice echoing from hidden amplifiers, "the lost princess crawls home with a pet human at her side." Rafe didn't answer. He was already scanning the flanks. 2 Vralkin Syndicate envoys stood to the side, their reptilian eyes unblinking. A dozen guards formed a half-circle in front of the throne. "This ends tonight," Zira said, her voice cutting clean through the chamber. The cousin rose, drawing his own blade, A thicker, heavier weapon, its edge glowing with a low orange light. It does. The guards closed in. Rafe moved first, using the last of his EMPs to blast the crystal inlays along the floor. The sudden flicker disrupted the palace's grav stabilizers, making the chamber's center a semi-zero-G pocket. The guards faltered as their footing shifted, and Rafe dove into the chaos. Zero-G again meant he could fight the way he'd learned in the rift. Every wall, every body, every piece of debris was something to push off of. He ricocheted between guards, disarming them with short, sharp bursts of force and stolen weapons fire. In the center of the room, Zira and her cousin clashed, blades humming and flaring where they met. She was faster, her movements all precision and economy. He was stronger, each blow forcing her back a step. When the cousin feinted and drew a hidden blade for his armor, Rafe saw it before she did. Without thinking, he kicked off a guard's chest and slammed into the cousin, intercepting the strike. Pain bloomed white-hot in his side as the blade punched through armor. Zira's eyes widened, not in shock, but in fury. With a single fluid motion, she swept his weapon aside and drove her own blade across his chest plate. The hum cut to silence. Her cousin crumpled to the crystal floor. The Vralken envoys exchanged a glance, then turned and slipped from the room without a word. Rafe sank to one knee, breath shallow, hand pressed his wound. Zira was already beside him, catching his weight as he started to sway. "You should have let him strike me," she said, voice trembling with something more than anger. "Not really my style," Rafe managed, forcing a grin to the pain. The hum of the palace seemed different now, less like an occupier's march, more like a living place breathing again. Chapter 7, Crown and Confession. The throne room smelled of ozone and scorched armor. The rain's muffled drumming on the crystal dome above blended with the distant growl of thunder still rolling over the city. Rafe sat on the edge of a long, curved med table just off the chamber floor. His jacket had been cut open, and a palace medic, thin, four-eyed, with delicate fingers tipped in gold, was sealing the wound along his side with a humming dermal torch. The seared edges smelled faintly metallic. Across the room, the palace nobility had begun to trickle in, called from hiding by the news that the usurper was dead. They were draped in iridescent silks, their expressions a mix of awe, disbelief, and calculation. Murmurs rippled through them like wind through reeds. The name Zira passed from mouth to mouth, whispered with a reverence not heard in this chamber for years. At the center, Zira stood before the crystal throne. The weight of the moment pressed around her like gravity. Slowly, she ascended the steps, each footfall echoing against the vaulted ceilings. When she turned, the nobility fell silent. Her voice carried without need of amplification. Verris Prime is free. The throne is restored to its rightful line. But this is not the end of our fight. It is the beginning of our healing. Those who served my cousin in betrayal will face justice. Those who were forced into silence will have a voice again. The nobles bowed, some deeply, others reluctantly. From his seat, Rafe watched her, how the lines of her face shifted between command and relief, how the storms outside painted her in shifting flashes of light. She belonged there. Even he, a human with no stake in her empire, could see it. The formalities stretched on, the murmur of courtly protocol weaving around the chamber. But eventually, the crowd began to thin, and Zira broke away from the line of advisors to cross the floor toward him. The medic stepped back with a bow and murmured, "The wound is closed. He will live." Zira dismissed him with a flick of her hand and stopped in front of Rafe. For a moment, she simply looked at him, her gaze lingering on the line of the bandage under his ribs, then meeting his eyes. "You were not meant to take that blow," she said quietly. Rafe smirked faintly. "Didn't seem right, letting you get stabbed in your own throne room. Bad optics." Her lips quirked, but it faded almost instantly. She reached for his hand, hesitant at first, then closed her fingers over his. "When we met on Verris Prime," she began, "I spoke of the Snuvva as if it were a joke. Perhaps to test you. Perhaps because I feared you would not understand what it meant. I still don't, not fully," Rafe admitted. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, meant for Malone. "The Snuvva is not a bargain. It is a vow. To give it is to bind one's fate to another, until death or betrayal parts them. No ruler offers it lightly. No ruler offers it to an outsider." She sank to one knee before him, the gesture shocking even in its quietness. The rain's rhythm on the dome seemed to hush. "I offer it to you, Rafe Calder of Earth," she said. "Not because you restore my throne, but because you fought for me without needing a throne as reward. Because you did not let me stand alone." The air between them felt charged, not like the storm, but like the breath before a leap. Rafe searched her face, half expecting to see calculation there, some hint of politics. Instead, there was only sincerity, fierce and unyielding. "You sure you want to tie your fate to a stubborn human?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. Her hand tightened on his. "That is exactly why." For the first time since they'd stepped into this fight, Rafe didn't have a quip ready. He just squeezed her hand back, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding older than the stars overhead. The throne was hers again. But the bond between them, born in back alleys, in zero-G battles, in the cold shadow of betrayal, felt like something far rarer. Chapter 8. Stars Beyond the Throne. Days passed in a blur of restoration. The palace halls, once echoing with booted patrols, filled again with a hum of servants and the music of crystal chimes swaying in the breeze from the high balconies. The curfew lamps were dismantled, replaced by the warm amber lanterns of old. In the plazas, merchants returned with their silk banners and spiced crystal braziers, letting the air fill with scents of saffron, cinnamon bark, and sea wind. From the observation platform, the city looked alive again. But Rafe didn't belong here. Not really. He knew it every time he caught sight of himself reflected in the polished crystal floors, a human spacer with scuffed boots and a jacket patched in 3 places. This was Zira's world. His place was somewhere between stars, where the only throne was a pilot seat, and the only crown was the glow of a hyperspace tunnel. The Emberwolf waited for him in the Royal Skydock, gleaming after days of hurried maintenance by Kenari engineers. The scent of new wiring and fresh alloy filled its corridors. He stood at the base of the boarding ramp, bag slung over his shoulder, taking one last look at the city skyline. The twin moons were setting, casting pale shadows over the crystal spires. Footsteps sounded behind him, measured, unhurried. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye?" Zira's voice carried that subtle blend of reproach and amusement she perfected since the day they met. Rafe glanced over his shoulder. She was dressed not in the ceremonial silks of the court, but in a tailored flight jacket of deep blue leather. A Kenari royal, out of uniform. "Figured goodbyes would just make it harder," he said. She stepped closer, the pale light catching the faint glimmer in her eyes. "Harder for whom?" He chuckled softly, shifting the bag. "Both of us, probably. You've got a planet to rebuild. I've got, well, other jobs to botch." Her expression softened, but there was steel under it. "You think this ends here?" Before he could answer, she turned toward the Skydock's upper balconies. The nobility and half the palace staff had gathered there, watching in curiosity. Her voice, when she spoke next, was pitched to carry across the chamber. "Rafe Calder of Earth," she said, "you came to me as a stranger, with no promise of profit worth the danger. You fought beside me in the rift, in the streets of Iliathus, and in the heart of this palace. You stood between me and death, not for power, but because it was right. For that, I name you honor consort of the throne." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept the balconies. Rafe froze, caught between wanting to laugh and wondering if she'd just sign his life away. "Consort?" he said under his breath. "That's going to look strange on a spacer's ID." She stepped closer, so only he could hear her next words. "It means you have a place here, should you ever choose it. It means the Snuvva still stands." Something in her tone told him she wasn't speaking as a ruler, but as a woman he'd fought beside since Verris Prime. He didn't answer right away. He just met her gaze and held it, letting the silence say the things neither of them was ready to. Finally, he slung the bag higher on his shoulder. "Guess I'll have to come back now and then. Wouldn't want to make you look bad in front of your court." Her lips curved in a smile that was all challenge and promise. Rafe walked up the Emberwolf's ramp, pausing halfway to glance back. Zira stood framed in the skydock light, her hair catching the glow of the lanterns, the city behind her alive once more. The freighter's engines rumbled to life, their deep, familiar vibration rolling through the deck plates. As the ship lifted from the skydock, Rafe looked out through the forward viewport. The twin moons sank behind the spires, and beyond them lay the infinite black, scattered with stars. Somewhere out there was his next fight. Somewhere out there, her vow waited like a beacon. And for the first time in a long while, he realized home might not be a place, but it could be a person. The Emberwolf drifted in high orbit, her engines murmuring like the heartbeat of some old, faithful beast. Through the forward viewport, Verris Prime shimmered, its crystal spires restored, lanterns glowing like constellations fallen to earth. Above, the stars stretched forever, 1,000 alien suns painting the void in silver and gold. Rafe leaned against the console, one hand resting on the worn leather of the pilot's seat. Zira stood beside him, the soft pulse of artificial gravity settling her cloak against her frame. The silence between them was comfortable now, weighted with everything they'd survived. "It's strange," she said softly, eyes on her homeworld. "I spent years thinking my life ended when I lost my throne. Then a human in a patched jacket taught me it could begin again." Rafe glanced at her, the corner of his mouth quirking. "Guess we're good at making messes worth cleaning up." She smiled, not the guarded mass of a ruler, but the rare, unguarded warmth he'd seen only in quiet moments. Stepping closer, she took his hand, fingers threading through his. "You restore my world, Rafe. But more than that, you reminded me what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." Outside, the planet turned slowly, sunlight flaring off its oceans. The stars seemed to lean in listening. He squeezed her hand gently. "Doesn't matter how far I go. You'll always be my waypoint." And in the hum of the engines and the endless sweep of the stars, it felt like a promise the universe itself would keep.